All right. Hello, everybody out there. Welcome to another edition of the Southern Oregon Sports Blog Podcast. I am, of course, Chris Phillips.
I am Phil Koenig.
Joining me one more time, we're going to talk some pennant race, talk a little playoffs maybe, see what's going on. We're going to talk some baseball here. We were just, right before we went on, we were talking about Kansas City. Let's start there. Start with the American League. We'll break that down a little bit. Neither of us really saw the Royals being able to back up what they did last year, yet here they are.
They are they are on fire, and they're certainly not looking like a team to slow down. They're looking very, very good going into the postseason. When you have just a dominant hitting team, you have great defense, you have a bullpen that is that every team can be jealous of.
Right.
Really, you have a complete team. Even the rotation, which has been
right.
So they're still able to win so many ball games. It's just amazing.
And no Alex Gordon lately. He's been hurt.
Right.
But Kendrys Morales, as a Mariners guy, we can get into that a little bit later. We were talking about that before the show. But he's been a big factor.
Huge factor.
This year.
Hosmer's had a strong season. Lorenzo Cain,
right.
Just
he's cooled off a little bit lately, but had a huge first half of the year.
But still, he's a guy that you have to take notice of.
Right.
If you're a pitcher, you have to think about not only about a high average on-base percentage, but he's great on the base paths too. So you have a complete player there.
They're definitely a do the little things team.
Absolutely. And that is a model that hasn't worked for every team, but it's definitely working for Kansas City this year. Yeah,
they're getting it done. Like you mentioned, the rotation, not anything to write home about. I was just mentioning Yordano Ventura as a guy that hasn't really taken that next step that a lot of people thought was going to be necessary to solidify that rotation to really let Kansas City back up last year.
Right, and you look at the rotation all season, and really, again, you're right. There's really nothing special about the rotation. Medlin coming back from Tommy John, and he's been okay. I would say probably a step above like Chris Young or even Jason Vargas. But really, when you have a complete team outside of your rotation, you're going to be really good.
And they really are the definition of that right now.
Right.
I was just checking Medlin. Currently, he's actually playing against me in my fantasy baseball playoffs. So he's going against me right now, currently with a 4-inning shutout going.
Okay.
So I'm still up.
All right.
Still up by a few. Still up by almost 40.
Okay.
I just got to make it to next week. I get that 2-start. I got a 2-start week out of Kershaw next week. So I gotta make it through this week, and then I'll be in the Final Four.
Yeah.
Toronto made the big deals that everybody wanted them to make. Finally, a team that was always kind of quiet at the trade deadline finally made probably the two biggest moves with Tulowitzki and Price.
And I'm gonna throw Ben Revere in there as well. He's been solid. He's been a solid pickup for Toronto. But you're right. You look at Toronto, and even before the trading deadline, they had such a good starting lineup from Bautista to Encarnacion.
Right. Donaldson.
The
Donaldson move to get to do that in the offseason and bring him into a lineup that, like you said, already had Bautista, already had Encarnacion, add Russell Martin.
Right, exactly. And then you throw in these guys who have actually done pretty good. Ryan Goins, you have
Pilar was great for a big portion of the season.
Right, and that's a lot of things going right in Toronto. And then you get to the trading deadline, you add Price, Tulowitzki, Revere, Mark Lowe as a great bullpen piece. and their young closer, Ozuna, thank you, who has been very, very good.
And having the flexibility to move Sanchez back out of the rotation where he has always struggled into a place where he can be absolutely dominant.
That is correct. And not only that, you're getting Stroman off the deal this weekend. Dickey has been much better in the rotation. So really another complete team, much like Kansas City. Very
And again, a little bit lacking in the rotation. I mean, you get Stroman back. Dickey's been fine. Hutchinson hasn't been. Another one of those guys like Ventura, maybe. Young guy, a lot of people were expecting a lot of. Hasn't really put up fantastic numbers.
But, again, when you have a team that can score as many runs as Toronto, then you'll take it.
Yeah, by far the highest scoring team in baseball. Backed up in second place right now by a Yankees team that not a lot of people saw coming.
I was certainly one of them. Yeah. Well, what's there to say about New York? I find it puzzling to see them in second place because I don't see any one or two members of that team being just like this dominant force. But you're getting a lot of just really good production out of guys like A-Rod and Carlos Beltran and Teixeira. And I mean, you're getting a little bit of production out of Headley and out of McCann. So, a lot of things are really clicking in New York. The rotation's a bit of a concern, but
Sabathia coming back, maybe at least hasn't been great for a few years now, but at least gives you a veteran stability, gives you something to sort of plan around.
Gives you some innings.
Right.
Yeah, certainly.
Houston not going away. They are not going away.
There's no way to explain how Houston has done what they've done, other than the fact that their young guys are showing up 1, 2, 3 years early. And
they're at least a year early. If not, the same with the Cubs, but they're at least a year early, if not, like you said, 2 or 3 years early.
Right. And I'm excited. I'm happy for them. I think they're doing a lot of the right things. They, too, made some really good trades before the trading deadline. I thought the Carlos Gomez deal was a really good deal for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And bringing up Correa and Altuve taking that next step in becoming a really dominant offensive force in that lineup.
And there, to me, obviously the Cubs also in the same comment. Those are the two clubs that are going to be linked for, I think, the next 5 or 10 years. The Cubs and the Astros are going to be those sort of, and we were actually talking about this a little bit last night during the volleyball game. Houston really the epitome of that sort of new, they have an organizational identity. They understand those next level, they call them sabermetrics. They understand those next level statistics. This is a team that is perfectly fine with having 3 or 4 guys strike out 150, 200 times.
Right.
They're perfectly fine with somebody hitting 215. If they make hard contact and they hit 25 or 30 home runs, the numbers show, when you actually dig into the numbers show that hard contact rate may be the single most important statistic on the offensive side of the game. If you're making hard contact, you cause more errors.
Yeah.
You're more difficult to defend. You find gaps in the defense more often. And so we were talking about the seeming increase in no-hitters and things like that, and pitching statistics actually going up.
Sure.
To me, it has to do with that sort of new school. We don't care. You swing. There's no such thing as a 2-strike approach anymore.
Right.
Nobody's choking up just to make contact.
Right.
Nobody's choking. You're not going to give up the benefit of swinging hard at every pitch in the zone that you can possibly swing hard at.
Right.
And so Houston really, to me, is that the epitome of what they're doing right now is based on that, especially, obviously, on offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to find that over time, you're gonna find those little pockets. You're gonna find that classic hit 'em where they ain't, that approach. And yeah, you're right. That's where, the dropped catches are going to take place. That's where the
it's
where
the
you're not
tempo
going to be
thing.
able to reach that little bloop single.
Right.
It's all about hitting. And
to me, it's the equivalent of, we're here in Oregon, what the Ducks have done for quite a while. It's the equivalent of tempo, offensive tempo in football.
Right.
It puts the defense on their heels. It makes making plays against that offense more difficult.
Right.
It keeps the defense guessing. They have to be keyed up all the time. It's grating, especially in a long game and a long season like baseball. So we're getting here towards the end, and you're seeing a lot of those things start to pay off.
Right.
The Rangers in second place in the AL West. They seem to be there in prime position to take that. I think they're leading right now for that second wild card.
Yes, they are. Another team that, huge surprise. You get a healthy Prince Fielder, and all season he's been great.
Yeah.
Beltre has been back and forth, but you're still getting a solid presence at third base. It's those little things also in Texas that are working.
Yeah.
Delino DeShields, a guy who Rule 5 guy, and now a starting center fielder for Texas, who's getting on base, who's making things exciting.
It's a nice little piece
for Texas, and so a good solid, a good solid guy on the base paths, and then adding a few other little pieces too to make this team a good contending team.
Be able to put together some strings and actually consistently win some baseball games.
Right.
Sorry, I laughed there in the middle. We're here in the AL West. It's where we live. It's what we know. 99 run differential for the Astros. -26 for the Rangers, -10 for the Angels, -86 for the Mariners. Yet the team with by far the worst record in the division, the Oakland A's, +5.
Right.
They have a positive run differential. They're currently 15 games out and 19 games under 500. It might be the unluckiest season I have ever seen.
You're probably right.
It's completely absurd.
Yeah. So hard to know what's going on in Oakland.
Yeah. They just gave Bob Melvin an extension.
They did.
So
I saw that.
So I think and again, this Billy Ball, this is the franchise that kind of pioneered that. So I think they see it too.
Right.
They know this isn't a 19 games under 500 team that they put together. So they're not going to panic. Nobody's pulling any fire alarms. It
is Billy Bean, though. You just never know what you're going to expect in an offseason.
Trading away Donaldson. Although, Laurie's been pretty good. A pretty good return. Barreto keeps moving up.
Yeah.
Keeps moving up prospect lists. So.
Right. So,
And again, we're here. I'll give you your moment. We were talking right before we went on about your Mariners.
Well,
figure I'll give you your chance here to.
Well, Chris and I, we had a conversation about what's going wrong in Seattle, and we both were sort of throwing out ideas as to why Seattle's they're just not producing the numbers that they should.
It never seems to fit. They never seem to find that time when everything comes together.
Right. And they just fired their general manager, and it's hard to really look at general manager Jack Zarenzik and say he is the one to blame for when you go from being a very high level scouting director for a team that not only has made some pretty good trades but also some really great drafts, you get Prince Fielder, Ricky Weeks,
Right.
Lucroy, Braun, just to name a few, Gallardo.
Right.
And these are guys who have been solid producers in the major leagues. And these weren't guys that they acquired in their prime. These are guys that they developed in their system.
Organizationally.
And you look at Seattle, you have Dustin Ackley, you have Mike Zunino, you have
just a string.
Oh gosh, Holtzen, you have all of these guys who have, when you've drafted them, Peterson is another great example. Yeah. He so highly touted, such a great
Ackley.
Right, Ackley. And they don't look like major league players. Right. They're bringing them up. Yeah, maybe they spend some extra time in the minors and they bring them up. They're not major league players.
Right.
And so there's something definitely going on in their scouting department. And Chris and I were having this debate about what can they do moving forward. And my thought was, okay, you bring in a general manager and you evaluate the team. You think, okay, what's working and what's not. And part of my argument was, okay, you have to have accountability for what's going on in the system, and it's not necessarily the general manager scapegoat that you can blame. You have to look at your high level executives.
Right.
I mean, yeah, you go out and you get Robinson Cano, you go out and get Nelson Cruz, you extend Kyle Seager. I mean, 3 really good players, but then you look at the rest of the team and you're relying on your young guys who...
You still got your fingers crossed that Ketel Marte can turn into something.
Right, and you hope that maybe Zunino turns it around.
Paxton, Walker.
Right. But, again, if I'm the principal owner of this franchise and I'm being told, oh, we have this great opportunity to get Cano, we have this great opportunity to get Cruz, I'm thinking, okay, absolutely, I'll dish out the money, but here's what I want to see. Right. I want to see that besides Cano, Cruz, Seager, I want to see that the other 6 guys who are in that lineup, I, as a principal owner, want to see that those guys are either ready to produce or you have options that you can utilize to fill those other spots.
Right, and this is something, another homer comment, but this is something the Giants have been great at. You can give that money to Hunter Pence. You can give the money to Kane and Bumgarner when you have Belt and Panic and guys like that can come up and fill holes at a legitimately major league level.
Right.
These guys are major league players.
Right.
And you can save the money there. You then have it to spend. You have it to spend on Angel Pagan.
Right.
And guys like that I mean.
But it goes back to, okay, over the last 14 years, okay, since Gillick has left the general manager seat, they haven't made the playoffs once.
Right.
Okay. So, is it the GM or is it the fact that you don't have a solid developmental team where okay, we've just drafted Dustin Ackley.
Right.
Here's this guy out of North Carolina who is highly respected, highly regarded. He is a guy that you can count on to be
He was
a
the
force.
safe pick.
Exactly. He was the guy that was supposed to be a solid presence at second base.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're getting nothing out of him.
Right.
Then
he was never more than a 220 hitter.
Right. And then you have Mike Zunino. Here's a guy who you draft. He is the next Dan Wilson. He's the guy who's going to be a solid presence behind the plate, and yet he's going to produce a 270 to 280 batting average,
right,
and knock out a few homers. The guy hits below 200, and he's good behind the plate, but you can find a guy who's good behind the plate,
right.
But that isn't that what you look for in a backup catcher,
especially in the American League,
right?
Where you have that extra, you have a DH to have a guy that's just a bat that can do nothing,
right?
That lets you sort of play with catcher, shortstop, somebody like that who is a complete black hole on offense.
Exactly. But then you look at a guy like Zunino, and you're thinking,
right?
What are we getting? Are we
two holes?
Are we trying to find a guy who's going to be a solid catcher defensively, or are you looking for someone who's going to be a force with the bat,
and that's not
in a weak offensive position?
And that's not what you spend a number 3 overall pick on, a guy who's
who they're saying, oh, he could be the next Mike Piazza, or he could be, making all of these comparisons, and it's just it just blows my mind how.
Do you think it's a college thing? We're sitting here talking. I'm thinking about, is it an inability to recognize something that's going to translate? Because actually, all these guys are college bats.
They are. Well.
So you think maybe there's something there?
Well, the question I have is then what's going on in other organizations where they too draft college players, and they make it into the pros and are successful. So, again, it's hard for me to know whether the general manager is to blame. You could easily just take this strong approach that, again, Gillick, when he was here, the Mariners were winning. And then you go to 2 general managers since then who they're not winning. They're not making it to the postseason. They're not.
What's missing?
Right. What's missing exactly? Or you can also take the approach that, okay, maybe it's the executives, the high-level executives, the president, the CEO, the chief operating officer. These are the high-level executives who make very, very tough decisions, sure, but they make the decisions nonetheless.
Right. And I understand
so
why.
Do you look at them and say, okay, this is where we're at. I understand. Sometimes it takes a while for a team to really build up.
Sure.
But the draft picks aren't working.
Right. Nothing's working.
Nothing is working right now.
Right.
And when you can sit there and brag about, oh, we got Cano, we got Cruz, we locked up Felix, we have Seager locked up. Where are your results?
Right.
So
it's got to take you somewhere.
And that's where I feel like, again, this was our little debate, whether ownership really needs to be involved more.
Right.
And that's where, again, I feel like maybe Seattle's ownership isn't as involved as they could be. Yes, they forked out the money to get the high level free agents, but it goes so far beyond that. They're not the New York Yankees, where the New York Yankees go out and get, they have historically gone out and got the high level free agents, but they can back it up,
and they can afford to fill holes that way.
Right.
Whereas most organizations, like I was just saying with the Giants, you have to do it the other way. You can buy the marquee guys. You can't buy those B and C level guys.
You can't.
Because you're going to have to overpay.
Right.
And you can't have a roster full of those guys.
Exactly.
You can have them at the top, but you got to be able to fill out the rest of that roster.
Right. And you can't rely on a platoon of Ackley and Ricky Weeks. Yeah. You can't count on Austin Jackson, who ended last season not hitting very well. You can't rely on
all
Logan
of a sudden gets traded away.
Right.
And he starts right when he starts hitting again.
Right. And you can't rely on Logan Morrison. He's back and forth. So again, it
they seem to have a string of Smoke, Morrison, Sexton.
oh
I mean, there's a lineage of these guys in Seattle that just.
But again,
they would learn.
But again, you have to look at. Okay, so you go out that year and you get Beltre, Sexton, you get all of these guys. Now, who's around them? Who's around them? Okay, so you're relying on young kids like Lopez and Betancourt, and then now you're saying, okay, you guys are the guys, and you're placing all of this pressure when you have nothing around them.
Right.
It's them.
Right.
You're counting on them, and then you're looking at them hitting 220, and you're like, oh, these guys are terrible. Well, look what you have around them.
They're not supposed to be superstars. These aren't.
These are guys who
Cano held up his end of the bargain.
And Cruz
at least so
has
far,
this year.
right?
And so you're. I hate to compare the Seattle Mariners to the New York Mets of the last 15 years, who just this season are starting to get it together. But it's hard not to look at the team who went out and acquired Carlos Delgado, Cliff Floyd, Paul LaDuca, Carlos Beltran, Granderson. You look at this team who's acquired top level talent, but they have fallen and they've paid for it. They've lost tons of money to guys who
they're still paying Bobby Bonilla.
They're still paying Bobby Bonilla,
and they are for what, like 6 more years.
But again, it's you have Robinson Cano after the season. You have him for 8 more years.
Right.
You know he's not going to. His numbers are not going to remain consistent.
Right.
So
Pujols has come back a little bit. I mean, he was never. I mean, power number. He was never. But I think they thought the skill set would actually age better than a pure power guy.
But look what's around Pujols.
Right. Well, sure.
You have an Angels team who has a relatively complete lineup.
Yeah.
I mean, the pressure's not on Pujols to be the 30 to 40 homer guy he was when in St. Louis. You're now looking more at, okay, what's Trout doing?
Right.
What's Calhoun?
Yeah.
Who's taking that next step?
They seem to be able to find those kind of. They're another one of those teams. They haven't been great. They're what? They're 500, 69 this year. But you can see. To me, Skaggs has been hurt. Their pitching has fallen apart on that.
Sure, right. But with the Angels, but the Angels are a team that has never been a 4th or 5th place team. They're always right in there.
Right.
And sure, you make the playoffs or you don't make the playoffs. At the end of the season, you're either in or you're out. Right. I mean, but with the Angels, you're always really encouraged. Like they're taking another step forward. Trout is the best player in baseball,
right.
and Pujols has shown that he can bring it again.
Swing it when all he has to do is sit back and swing from his heels. He can.
Right, but again, your Pujols, just there's not as much pressure. He has the big contract, absolutely, but when the spotlight's on Trout, when everything is revolving around
everything,
Mike Trout,
and yet it's not happening, and because he's not producing at quite that level in Washington, you have Bryce Harper.
Absolutely.
You have a guy who was supposed to be the face of the sport, not the team.
Right.
The face of the sport for the next 10 years.
Right.
And he's growing. He was obviously young. I mean, came up at 19. He's growing into what I think he's going going to grow into what everybody have always expected him to be.
Right.
But then Rendon gets hurt and isn't. Span is hurt for most of the year. The pitching staff is... We went into this season thinking this is the best 5-man rotation in the history of baseball.
Mm-hmm.
In all likelihood, this is the best 5-man rotation we are ever going to see.
Right.
And it's been Max Scherzer and a bunch of... I mean, Strasburg can't stay healthy. Gonzalez isn't what? Fister's Roark, these guys, right. They're 6th, 7th starters. I mean...
When you have a guy who is pitching better than 4 of your other starting pitchers in Joe Ross, then you have to really think, okay,
right,
what's going wrong here?
And one of those guys is Steven Strasburg.
One of those guys is Steven Strasburg, absolutely.
Who just can't stay healthy.
Right.
He's one of those guys. I mean, it's what I'm afraid, as a guy who I have on a couple, it's what I'm really afraid Byron Buxton is going to turn into. It's one of these snake-bit guys that just cannot ever put the raw tools into play.
Right. Yeah. And it's freak little things.
Right.
But it is
right, but they add up.
They do.
And when you're getting this hurt this young, it's not going to get any better as you get older and get more wear and tear on a body.
It's not.
And when you're reliant on those tools, on the pure athletic ability.
Right.
So you talk a little bit about the Mets. Let's stick with the NL East.
Okay. God, New York came
another team that absolutely nobody saw this coming.
Right. And I would say maybe the best trading deadline pickup, maybe the best in Cespedes.
Okay. He's certainly been playing like
he
it.
Has.
He has been a wrecking machine for the last.
He has been absolutely great for New York. When you have a pitching, speaking of a really great pitching staff,
and some of these guys were not nearly as. I mean, Matz.
Right.
Not a particularly highly regarded prospect.
Right.
I mean, yes, Syndergaard, Harvey. They have guys who were.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Big Bad Bart is taking the world by storm right now. He is pitching out of his mind.
He is. And
he's doing it at about 84 miles an hour.
Right. and he's hitting more this season than he ever has before, which I actually find hilarious.
Yeah. Everybody does.
Well, and the toss around the back.
Sure, yeah.
To first base. But New York, they're just Flores and
Neuenhuis with the game-winning home run. I mean, guys completely out of nowhere.
Right. And Granderson, we talked about him, but he's putting together a pretty decent season and doing it again, coming out of nowhere to do it. And so a lot to like in New York. I think they're a team that other teams have to take notice of. Right. For sure.
And again, that young rotation. DeGrom, Harvey, Syndergaard, Matz. That
right. And they're gonna get Wheeler back.
Yep.
And they have another young kid in Montero. If he ever stays healthy, he's also been
Familia has been
Familia
fantastic.
Has been really good.
Yeah.
Coming out of nowhere when everybody was thinking he was going to be third in line after Parnell and what's his name?
I'm blanking on it too.
Yeah.
Which should tell you something.
Right. Obviously, the 2 suspensions for drugs are
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's they will always look. There will always be a spitball.
Right.
There will always be. These are at heart. These are competitors.
Right.
And they're gonna look for every possible advantage they can get.
Yeah.
It's built into guys like this to do that kind of thing.
Right.
Which is why was it the Daniel Tosh? I want my players on steroids. I want them hitting. I want to make 2 different leagues.
Sure.
They do it in bodybuilding. There's the naturals, and there's the anything goes.
Right.
So I think it'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah.
All right, NL Central. The Cardinals doing what the Cardinals do, switching off. The Giants a little bit down this year, so it's the Cardinals' turn to step on up.
Exactly.
Consistent, and I talked about it a little bit with Houston, and I think it applies to Seattle. You have to have an identity. You have to have an organizational vision,
right,
that goes from the top all the way down. You have to have a plan for what are we gonna do,
right,
and the Cardinals are absolutely the pinnacle of that, especially in baseball. They find guys, Grichuk, right? A decent prospect, but a guy who can step right in to center field. They find that Colton Wong, guys, they know what they want to do, the kind of team they want to put out on the field, and they find guys who fit that mold.
Right.
And I think that's a big piece of what the organizations who can't seem to put it all together are missing. They don't have that look. They just go by stats.
Right.
They don't have a whole vision. They don't have an entire idea of this is this kind of team wins baseball games.
Right.
And they do it with pitching and they do it with hitting.
Right.
And they find guys who fit their mold. And they might not be as successful other places, but they know they have this particular skill set. And we can bring that in and leverage that skill set in a particular way and get results.
Absolutely. And St. Louis always gets the results.
Yeah.
But you're right. A lot of really good points, especially that team that has that identity. We talked about this before, too, when you look at management and you move from La Russa to Matheny, really, again, you're
seamless.
Exactly. It really, there was not much of a, there was no drop off in production. But St. Louis, they know how to get it done. They can, like you were saying, they can bring guys in from free agency, but they also know how to build their own guys
all the way down to see, and it's like they can see those attributes all the way down through their draft. Absolutely. They draft a lot of these guys, and they're organizational. So they don't have to go by the big names.
Exactly.
They can trade for them using organizational depth. Certainly. They can go get Matt Holliday.
Right.
They can go get guys like that. Because they know Molina's behind the plate.
Yeah.
And he's going to be here.
Right.
And he's going to be the kind of guy that every pitcher wants to throw to.
Right.
And they just seem to have an idea of the kind of things, like I said, guys who might not be as successful other places, but they see a particular set of things that they can do.
Yeah.
And they can bring them into their organization and really take advantage.
Right.
Of exactly what this guy does really well.
Right. Right. And again, when you have leadership, when you have your executives take a really strong interest in building up a team, not only building up, but maintaining a very strong organization who is highly regarded amongst other teams in professional sports.
They're the Spurs.
Right. Then you know you're doing something right. Then you know that you're doing, I hate to say this, you know you're doing everything right.
Right.
You know that you're going to have a product on the field that fans can go to and can cheer for.
Sure.
You know that you're going to be well respected in the community. People are going to know St. Louis as a baseball town.
Right.
And so I have a tremendous amount of respect for St. Louis.
Oh, of course.
And their ball club. going into this year, going back to the pennant race,
Right.
I have to look at them as
sure.
the standard for this season again.
I think any team that can throw Clayton Kershaw and Zach Greinke in a series is going to be right there with. I mean, that's the only thing I think keeping St. Louis from being the prohibitive favorite to be the National League representative in the World Series is Kershaw and Greinke.
But at the same
That's
time,
the only thing.
right? And I agree with you. But look at St. Louis's rotation.
Yeah.
Even
With
without
no Wainwright.
Adam Wainwright, they are still just ridiculous. They are just.
Carlo Martinez is starting to. I had him. He went today. Didn't look great. He's
You're right.
starting to lose steam a little bit. But that's a guy. I mean, 23. He's hit that in that level, that 180 innings
Right.
spot where he's starting to. I think they may
They may take, but
dial
still,
him back for the next.
when you go into the postseason, you're looking for 4 starting pitchers. You're not looking for a 5-man rotation. So even if
it's different guys,
right?
Even if it's Martinez for the championship series, and it might be Waka for the divisional series or somebody like that.
And so again, I'm in 100% agreement with you on Kershaw, on Greinke, but you have
I'm
to
not
be
saying
able to,
it makes them the favorite. I'm saying that's the only thing that stops St. Louis from being the overwhelming favorite.
right, but Kershaw has to get it done in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's the one little
No, that's a great
that's
point.
the one step that I think Kershaw needs to make in order to really really prove that Los Angeles is the team to beat in the National League.
Sure. Pittsburgh, pretty clearly going to make the first wild card spot.
I think so.
And they're a team that's managed to put a lot of things together, too. In a smaller market, they have their superstar, obviously, Andrew McCutchen. They're a team that has been able to develop some young guys, Marte. I mean, some solid, and they have some guys still let down in that organization, especially pitchers,
Right.
who could very well be difference makers in the next 2 or 3 years.
Right. Pittsburgh, again, a lot of things to like about Pittsburgh. Garrett Cole has been a really good starting pitcher this season. I would say he has been their staff ace all season. Liriano has been really good. And their bullpen has been pretty solid.
Fine.
I mean,
Melanson blew one.
Melanson got lit up
Either
a little
yesterday
bit,
or the other day, but
last night. But really, he's been.
But Watson Melanson is a perfectly fine. You feel
right.
just fine throwing out out there as an 8th, 9th inning.
And even Soria has been good for Pittsburgh.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of good things going on in Pittsburgh.
So that takes us to the Cubs, another team that again is probably a year ahead of schedule.
Right. Again, we talked about this briefly, and I believe it was our last podcast where we talked about how the Mets and the Cubs have that perfect match, that perfect mix to just make a really good trade.
Right.
And I think that the only thing that's holding Chicago back is maybe their pitching.
Yeah.
Lester's been fine. Hamill's been a pleasant surprise in the rotation this season. Arrieta has been really good.
Fabulous.
Yeah, really good. And even Hendricks has been a pretty decent
you can
pitcher.
fill it out from there, but
right. But I think they have that. They have the potential to become really good over the next few years.
I mean, when you're about to throw Schwarber, Rizzo, Bryant, Russell, just those 4.
Right. Soler.
Going right.
Yeah.
If he can, I mean, him and in LA, Puig.
Yeah.
Those to me are 2 huge. I mean, they're very similar players.
Right.
And those are 2 guys that both organizations are
very high on.
going to be right, and their fortunes are really going to be tied to them for a while.
But then you have a solid presence at the top of the lineup in Dexter Fowler, who has he's had a good
been
year.
Exactly the right guy to plug in at the top there.
Right.
And again, I think it's what we were talking about. They know what he can do.
Right.
And they tell him to go out there every day and do what he can do.
Right.
There aren't any undue expectations. Go out there and play your game.
Right.
And when you can do that, like you said, it takes a lot of pressure off.
Right.
When you know you can go out there and just focus on what you already do really well and go out there and see the results and be productive and have an organization that's going to support you and say, go out there and do your thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge thing for a player like that, a player that had always been in that sort of underwhelming in Colorado and Houston and all the places he had been, was always on those preseason lists.
Right.
Ready to break out, ready to be the next big thing.
Right.
And it never quite happened.
Right.
Till he gets to the right place that says, look, go out there and do what you do.
Right.
And he can turn it loose a little bit. And
right.
I mean, it's a whole different attitude of coming to the park every day and knowing you don't have to, there's no pressure. You don't have to overreach.
Right.
Dodgers running away with the West.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just not going to be there. The Giants are just not going to have enough to compete.
Well,
coming down the stretch,
it's an odd year.
Yeah, and it's not there. Right.
The thing about the Giants is, much like Washington, just too many injuries.
Yeah.
An inconsistent starting rotation. That again, it's hard not to look at injuries as being a huge reason why. I mean, San Francisco's in second place in the AL West.
Right.
And so there's really not anything to be ashamed of
No.
at all. But again, when Kane hasn't been Matt Kane,
that to me is probably the first bullet point for the entire season.
Right. And an outfield that just cannot stay healthy.
Right. If you can actually throw Pence and Pagan out there for 150 games a year, you got a little something.
Right. And if you have a good, strong, healthy rotation, certainly anchored by Bumgarner, who has been ridiculously good again this season. But, you know, again, you look at San Francisco and again, you could throw Pence and Pagan out there 150 games and you know you're going to get solid production. And throw in Aoki, who's been certainly been exactly what they need.
Right.
But you have this young kid for in the rotation,
Heston,
thank you. Who has been good.
Yeah.
He's been good.
And nobody had heard of.
Right, exactly.
Before. It's another one where they find guys that nobody else.
Right. And then, you're sort of off and on with Vogelsong, but when he's on, he's good. So it's like...
Right. When you're going into a season counting on Tim Hudson and Jake Peavy and Ryan Vogelsong to be crucial members of what you're trying to. Everything has to break right.
Absolutely,
and it just didn't happen.
But there have been some really bright spots in San Francisco this year. I think some of the highlights for me looking at San Francisco, I have to say, huge fan of Panic, huge fan of Duffy.
Yeah. Yes,
Crawford has had a really strong breakout season. Posey is Posey. I mean,
absolutely.
He's the guy that I wanted Zunino to be like.
Yeah.
He's the one that I wanted Zunino to be that, next Buster Posey, if you will. But he, once again, is proving to be just an all-around defensive, offensive, strong player.
We were having this discussion with a friend of mine about they've kind of switched. I'm still a Buster guy. They've moved on to Madison being the guy that you have to. I mean, being your fan favorite. But I'm still a Buster guy.
Oh, as am I. I think. Again,
I mean, I love Bum. But,
oh yeah.
I mean, but there's something about an everyday player, especially at catcher, that he is an absolute rock.
Yep.
And a guy that makes the pitching staff better because they're comfortable throwing to him.
Right.
He calls incredible games.
Right.
He's never going to be a 30 home run guy.
No.
He's a 305, 17 to 22 home run, somewhere right there, low 20s. But he's clutch as anybody's business.
Right.
I mean, he's a face of the franchise guy that you can plug into anything you could ever want him to do.
Right.
And have every confidence that he's going to go out there and do it.
Yeah. Yep.
So
agreed.
Professing my Buster Posey fanboyness, I think is probably a good way to finish this one up. We're almost in an hour, so that's a good spot. Anything else you want to hit before we get out of here?
Nope. I will say this, and this was a thought I had just before we went on. I was thinking back on our first podcast this season and all of our predictions for what we thought the postseason was going to look like.
Sure.
And I would say that St. Louis and maybe Toronto.
Yeah.
Those were the two teams I think still in it that we predicted.
Yeah.
I never would have said.
And I still think they're probably the strongest teams, other than maybe Kansas City.
Right. We never would have said New York Mets. We never would have said the New York Yankees.
Nope.
We never would have said Texas. We never would have said Houston.
Nope.
Never would have said Kansas City. It's just it's funny.
That's why I love baseball.
It's funny to think back at that time leading into the season and how
Washington again. To me, that's
right.
the big failing.
The Washington and Boston.
You were higher on Boston to begin with than I was.
Yeah, you're probably right. But and Detroit too.
Yeah, they really have not.
But it's funny to see how a season can, how any season can be just completely unpredictable.
Sure, it's the longest season. They play so many games. Right. It just really is a grind. All right, thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
One more time, we'll get this one up probably tomorrow morning, and we'll be back soon. We'll talk some more baseball. Have you back? Have a chance to talk with some other people probably next week as we go run into conference play in high school football. As we run in, sorry, that's not my cord. Sorry about that. And thanks everybody out there. Tune in one more time, and we'll sign off.